Sorry. All right. Yeah.
It's an old film made in 2001, but given the kind of politics in India today, the film has unfortunately become more relevant than the times when it was made.
So what we won't talk much about the film before we show it. It's a film about a poet, a painter, and the city, and our visions of the city. So we'll show an excerpt and then talk about it.
मुंबईच्या उंचावरील मलबारी इंद्रपुरी अहो मुंबईच्या उंचावरील मलबारी इंद्रपुरी कुबेराची वाची तिथं कुबेराची वाची तिथं कुबेराची वाची तिथं पळाचा आणाने जात दिवसा बनाले मिळते खाऊन घाम गाळाची खाऊन घाम गाळाची नारी गाडी मोटर गाडी विमान सांगांची माती
पटूर खांद्यावर टाकून सह्याद्री घाट उतरून माझा बाप तुझ्या दारावर उभा राहिला श्रम घेऊन. केव्हा येई केव्हा निघून जाई ठाऊक जन्मदातेला ओक आलेल्या म्हाताऱ्या घरात एका रात्री माझा जन्म. पगाराच्या दिवशी खिसा ठेवून आदळत घुसायचा घरात आई भीतीने अंग चोरून उभे राहायची बिचारी कोपऱ्यात. आम्हावर भारी लोक एक दिवसही केला नाही खरा. आम्हावर भारी लोक एक दिवसही केला नाही खरा. हे नगरी तुझ्या सेवेत चुकला नाही पिसाचा पाढा. या चिंचपोकळी भागामध्ये रस्त्याच्या सडकेवर माझ्या आईने 3-4 महिन्याचं मी असेल तेव्हा कचऱ्याच्या पेटीजवळ सोडून ती गेली. ती का गेली तिचं तिला माहित. त्याच वाटेने इंडिया वुलन मिल मध्ये राशन डिपार्टमेंट मध्ये काम करणारे विरण कामगार गंगाराम किशाजी सुरे ते सकाळी 7च्या पाळीला माहीमवरून चालत 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 महालक्ष्मीला यायचे. आणि त्यावेळेस त्यांच्या कानावर माझ्या रडण्याचा आवाज. त्याने मला घरी आणलं. घरी बाई मला सांभाळणारी काशीबाई तिच्या स्वाधीन केला. म्हणाले हा आपला बाळगलेला मुलगा रस्त्यावर पडलेला होता, त्याला मी आणला तो सांभाळ. ही सगळी हकीकत त्यांनी 10-12 वर्षाचा झालो असताना मला त्यांनी सांगितले की तू आम्हाला कसा सापडलास, कुठे सापडलास, तू कसा होतास. त्यांनी गमतीने असं मला सांगितले की तुझं पोट फार मोठं होतं, किरटा होतास एकदम. तेव्हा मराठीमध्ये म्हण आहे, हात पाय काड्या आणि पोट ढेर वाड्या, अशी मराठीमध्ये म्हण आहे. तर तसा तू होता. त्याने शाळेत जाऊन मला आपलं नाव दिलं. मला त्यांनी नाव ठेवलं माझं नारायण. पण नारायण गंगाराम सुरू म्हणजे आपल्या रस्त्यावरच्या मुलाला आणून त्यांनी स्वतःचं नाव देऊन वाढवलं. त्याच्यात खूप मोठं ग्रेट वैभव कुठलंच नाही. हा, त्यांनी मला नाव दिलं आणि त्यांनी माझं वय लावलं आणि अंदाजे वय तेव्हा घ्यायचे साहेब. नुकत्याच दुसरं शाळा आलं तर माहीमच्या शाळेमध्ये माझं दाखल केलं आणि ते अंदाजे वय लावलं तर ते माझं. त्याने जी माझी जात लावली ती माझी जात, त्याने जो माझा पत्ता दिला तो माझा पत्ता, ते माझे पालक होते. मी एके ठिकाणी येऊन तरी बरं झालं, वर्किंग क्लास कामगार असून माझं रिलेशन असं म्हणतो.
छोड़ गोखले लोग ठंडा छोड़ इनसे तो आते कितनी रोड चला दी जाने आते कितनी आते कितनी रोड चला दी जाने आनी गली रोड की आत्मा चंता नहीं अंतर आरबी सागर आता गड़ाई के भगवती मार आओ गली रोड की आत्मा चंता नहीं अंतर आरबी सागर आता गड़ाई के भगवती मार
I came to Bombay in '73. I came with the specific purpose of becoming an artist. And but coming to Bombay and just being exposed to the hugeness of things and the number of people, and that really started me off on the kind of work that I did. When I came to Bombay and started looking around, and for the kind of first fruitful image that I kind of started working on was the image of workers that I used to encounter in the train. So as I was making drawings of these working class figures, I was projecting myself, my own anger and frustration, whatever. But this confrontation with another person who had a life that was different from mine, who belonged to a class that was different from mine. I did not really know at first hand what this life was. I was looking at it, but and I was drawn to it, but that is not the life that I had led. For example, a painting of a screaming woman or of a worker, which essentially are still expressionist in that sense. They're basically about the artist's emotion. It kind of made me conscious that I must observe more objectively, and I must draw back the projections that I'm making onto that figure. This set of paintings, which was from 76, 77 onwards up to 80, which are kind of single working class figures in a specific environment. This is the first set of painting in which Bombay as a city makes its advance in my work.
अपने आगे सभी झुके हैं क्या क्या देंगे नौकर हो या मालिक लीडर हो या पब्लिक अपने आगे सभी झुके हैं क्या क्या देंगे सुन अरे राजा सुन सिस्टम तीन बड़े बड़े सुन अरे राजा सुन सिस्टम तीन बड़े बड़े नाक खोटी एक दवा है चूना आज मारी अरे चटराए या दिल डूबा जाए आजा प्यारे आज हमारे काहे घबराए
मुंबई हे 7 बेटांचं गाव आणि इथे मुख्यतः राहणारे लोक कोळी हे मुंबईचे मूळचे रहिवासी. पुढे इंग्रज राज्य आले. ही 7 बेटं एकत्र त्याला त्यांनी त्यावेळेस एक मुंबई किंवा काय नाव दिलं आणि त्या बेटांनी एकत्र आल्यानंतर इथे हा कापड उद्योग का निघाला त्याची कारणं अशी आहे. इथून मोठा समुद्र किनारा आहे. समुद्र किनारा असल्यामुळे हवामान दमट आहे. आणि दमट हवामान हे कापसाला फार उपयुक्त असतं. आणि मुंबईतनं पुन्हा रेल्वे मार्ग त्यांनी सुरू केला. त्या सगळ्यातून हळूहळू पहिल्यांदा मुंबई गिरण पहिली असा वर्किंग क्लासचा इथून सुरुवात. कळू आले तेव्हापासून डबा घेऊन साच्यावर गेलो. घडवतो लोहार हातोड्याला तसाच घडवला गेलो. शिकलो तार कशी लावावी, बाबीण कशी भरावी धोट्यात. वेळ आलीच तर हक्कासाठी केव्हा करावी आल्या खात्यात. तिथे ज्या सागर तिरी झुंजत त्यानेही दे. त्याच्या चाच्यावर दमेकरी मुकादमाने मला नाही. पण पुढे गंमत अशी झाली की 10-12 वर्षी चौथी पास झालो. तर त्यामुळे मला ते म्हणाले की तू आता 10-12 वर्षाचा झाला, चौथी शिकला, आता हे 10 रुपये घे. आम्ही कोकणात चाललो आणि मी पुन्हा अनाथ झालो. पण माझ्या पोएट्रीमध्ये ना घर होते ना गणगोत, चालेल तेवढी पायाखालची जमीन. दुकानांचे आडोसे होते, मोफत नगरपालिकेची फुटपाथ खुलीच होती. पुन्हा मला फुटपाथ खुली झाली. लाईफ आणि पोएट्री कसं रिलेशन आलं ते आपोआप मदत केली. मग मी मिळेल ते काम करावं लागलं. जिन्याखाली बांधण ठेवायचं. त्यावेळेस ते चांगलं होतं, माणसामध्ये अधिक प्रेम. पाया बापड्या बोलावून मला अन्न घालायचं, हे प्रेम आहे काम करायचं. हे प्रेम वर्किंग क्लास मधलं प्रेम. हे सांगून येत नाही, हे पुस्तकात येत नाही, ते अनुभव. एकदा तुम्हाला गंमत माहेरला राहायला होतो, ती आणि बॉडी जवळ. आम्ही समुद्रावर पोरं पोहायला गेलो. हा माहीमचा समुद्र. तेव्हा तिथे कांदे तोडायला मी जायचो. कांदे एक मी तोडायला सांगतो. समुद्रावर पोहायला गेलो त्या माहीमचा. तर माहीमला मशीद आहे. मशीदच्या मागे फकीर ते इकडे तिकडे ते असे तसे का ते यायचे. आणि माझा एक दिवस आम्ही 5-6 मुलांनी कपडे काढून दगडाखाली ठेवले, वाऱ्याने उडू नये. ते फकीर जो आला, आम्ही आपले पोहण्याच्या नादात त्यांनी सगळ्यांचेच कपडे घेऊन. आता सगळ्यांचे कपडे घेतले ते घरी जाणं कपडे, आपल्याला काहीच नाही ना, आपल्याला घर नाही दार नाही. मी आता म्हटलं काय करावं म्हणून तिथून जो पळत सुटलो तर माहीमच्या मशिदीत सुटलो, त्या दर्ग्यामध्ये. दर्ग्यामध्ये जी कबर आहे त्या कबरीच्या मागे दडून बसलो. असाच नागडाच दडून बसलो. ते मुसलमान मंडळी आमचे नमाज पडायला यायचे. ते नमाज पडताना त्यांची एक सिस्टीम होती की ते हातात टॉवेल आणायचे, टॉवेल अंतरायचे, टॉवेल बसून अल्लाला अभिवादन करायचे किंवा नमस्कार करायचे. तर माझा शेवटी भ्यालेला नाही. त्या कबरीच्या मागून श्वास कुठेतरी गेला. त्याच्या लक्षात आलं नमाज पडता तो थांबला. कोण आहे ते पिछे? तुम्ही आपला हात वर केला. उठलाच नमाज टाकून बाहेर आला. त्याने मला शिव्या घातल्या, इधर क्या चुपके करतो, अरे खडे राहो, तुम तो नंगे हो. याची बात नाही, तुम कहाँ हो, क्या आहे विचार केलं. पण त्याने आपला नमाज पडायचा टॉवेल मला दिला. ते माझं पहिलं बक्षीस आहे. ते मी टॉवेल नेचलो आणि बाहेर पडलो.
Yeah, so that's an excerpt from this film, which is about 50 minutes. And in many ways, the film is our tribute to the city of Bombay, Mumbai, whatever you want to call it, which has been such an influential and formative space in our own lives. We came to the city as first generation migrants, and it has shaped us in very many ways. So the film started off initially as a project to create a narrative around the work of the artist Sudhir Patwardhan, whose work we greatly admired and were familiar with. And we decided to work with the word and the image, and we were looking for a poet, and Narayan Surve was a very sort of obvious choice given the power of his poetry and the way in which it really captured the essence of working class Mumbai. So that's how Narayan Surve walked into our film.
For us, it was a very daunting task. We started out the project with a lot of trepidation. Because to kind of, how do you conceptualize this complex space called Mumbai into a film? So that's where we were kind of looking for a metaphor that would tie up the many ideas that we're talking about. So that's where the idea for Loom became very handy, which kind of helped us weave this narrative together. So the Loom, like the city of Mumbai, is a dialectical space. The warp and the weft, and though apparently moving in different directions, kind of makes possible the fabric of the city. It kind of helped us at least to kind of look at the history and the geography of the city, and with its larger horizon of the textile industry. What's also interesting is that this is a well-known architect called Charles Correa once described Bombay as a wonderful city and a terrible place. So it is that dialectics, the kind of how does one deal with that city without romanticizing it, looking at that wonderful city as well as looking at that terrible space that offered that the city offered to us. So basically, the idea of word and image, painting and poetry became part of this complex weave, so to speak.
As you would know, Mumbai is the birthplace of the working class movement in India. And it is in many ways a secular space, or it was, you could say, and a great melting pot. The British inherited the city as dowry from the Portuguese and developed it into a mercantile center, and then later it became, where the textile industry started off. And as they wanted to attract workforce from the hinterland, whether for the port or the mills, they offered the space as a kind of secular space where the migrants would have freedom to practice their own faith, their own cultures. And in many ways, this utopian energy informed the city of Mumbai as we knew it when we first came to the city in the 70s. And that city was very rapidly slipping away, in a sense, from us as we moved into the 80s and the 90s, and the city became a very different space.
So the poet and the painter, of course, we've shown you a short, a brief excerpt from the film, are both trying to kind of grapple with this changing face of the city. It's as it were, they're trying to step into that Heraclean river to kind of talk about loss, talk about the kind of changes within that city. And we are actually, as filmmakers, with our images and hanging on to the coattails of the painter and the poet, trying to grapple with the kind of changes that we have as filmmakers, as residents, as citizens have witnessed in the city. And the film actually also at a micro level tries to kind of appropriate this idea of the Heraclean River by, because it kind of revisits the same spaces differently at different juncture. For example, you saw the image of the woman selling tomatoes in the beginning, which is a commonplace image that you find in the city, but it kind of recurs much later and becomes a very traumatic and image which is very turbulent, where there's a torrential rain and she's just hanging on to those tomatoes, trying to sell them. So, and that's not the only instance where the Irani restaurant that you saw, when we revisited later, much more a business-like image where the lights have fled and the song is kind of over, so to speak. If you have.
If we have the time, could we show a 3-minute clip, or we could end here? Depending, Vinay, what would you say?
Well, if it's going to be 3 minutes, I think we can do it, but perhaps not longer than that, though. Yeah.
Exactly 3 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is the conclusion of the
This is
film.
the last 3 minutes of the
Yeah.
film.
The early years where the city was a site of a certain kind of plasticity. And that is the context in which I was painting my workers. Now it was a stage for something happening. After the textile strike and after that, a long kind of had some friends working in the unions at that time. And the general kind of loss of faith and loss of confidence that we went throughout the movement made the city itself kind of unfocused perceptually. That there were cities and cities within a city, and there's not necessarily something connecting all this as there was earlier, and therefore the idea of the concept of a grand structure, a grand narrative, could not be sustained.
कामगार भागामध्ये 18-18 मधली इमारती कोणी नव्हत्या. आता 12-12, 15-15 मधली इमारती आहेत. राहतो कोण? कामगार नाही, तिसरा चंद्र राहतो. तुम्ही चंद्राचे बघा ना, तेवढी बंब सारखी मोठी त्याला जमिनी मोफत मिळाल्या आणि त्यासोबत इमारत. असं सगळं एक प्रकारचं चेंजेस आहे. मी म्हणतो तो संबंध जग बदलणार आहे. मी माझ्या कवितेत लिहिलंय हो. कधी कधी वाटतं अरे नारायण खोटं लिहिलेलंच नाही काय, खोटं नाही येते. पण कवी एकामध्ये इच्छा आणि स्वप्न पाहत, दुसऱ्यामध्ये रियालिटी. ब्राह्मण नाही, हिंदोही नाही, नवीन एक पंथाचा केशवचूक म्हणाले 100 वर्षापूर्वी. आज आम्ही तीच मुवमेंट घेऊन देतो, पण संबंध बांधणी नीट नसल्यामुळे अशी परिस्थिती दिसते. आणि म्हणून मी म्हणतो की वर्किंग क्लासला फ्युचर नाही असं नाही, वर्किंग क्लासच चेंज करेल, पण त्याच्याकडे गमावण्याचं काय नाही. विकता विकता त्यांनी सूर्य बाजारात आणला. विकता विकता त्यांनी सूर्य बाजारात आणला. घर फुंकून निघालेले लोक पाहतच राहिले. अशा वेळी स्वस्थ बसून कसे चालले. बघता बघता त्यांनी हातही बाजारात आणला. बघता बघता त्यांनी हातही बाजारात आणला. हाताची घडी घालूनच कसे झाले. म्हणून मी उठलो, वस्तीच्या बाहेर गेलो, कारखान्यांच्या कानात पुटपुटलो. आता आपणाला खूप करायला हवे, आता आपल्याला खूप.
डोंगरी चित माझा गाव, मी बेनो किती. डोंगरी चित माझा गाव, मी बेनो किती. आलावरीच राबून मी मारू किती. आलावरीच राबून मी मारू किती.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we have about 10 minutes for a discussion. All comments, thoughts, questions are welcome.
Professor Vinay Lal, Winnipeg, Canada. Maybe Anjali ji and KP, you may never heard of Winnipeg, but also we have 2 other friends from Winnipeg, Professor Dashanamurthy and Professor Ganga Dashanamurthy, and one of my famous friend from Mohali, Professor Atanjit Singh, he joining us from Chicago. But mostly, I have to acknowledge my friends who joining today, and I had to commend the producers, Anjali Ji and K. This is a tapestry of poetry, art, history, poverty, and opulence. It's shades of New York and flavor of some Slumdog Millionaire when we all see that movie. So thank you. But let me just identify the artistry, the stark artist imagery of this gentleman who is so wealthy, he's heavy and well-fed, but has no brain. I want to thank you for the vivid artistry, poetry, music, and basically the history of Mumbai. You've been very informative. We learned so much from a city we thought we know a lot about. And I'm originally from Guyana, South America. Thank you.
If I can say something, these films, I know these were not full films, but it was very, very powerful. And I love this very rare and great balance between tragedy and comedy. And I think it was all there. It was in the same time funny and terrible, you know, and that's why it had a big vital power. Yeah, so it was very touching, and I'm very moved. Thank you.
Anyone else have any thoughts, questions? Russell.
Yes, thank you. I want to thank the filmmakers of obviously, I'm not from India, but my father during World War II, he was riding a train. I think it was through Calcutta, and he was saying that he was sleeping naked on the train with a towel over his belly, and I think the kind of visceral, the poetry that you bring to the movie, especially to the working class, but also telling the history of the how Bombay developed as a British sort of mill city. It's really wonderful the way you put everything together without hitting you over the head. It's a very political film, but also very poetic. So I like to thank you. I'm my name is Russell. I'm one of Vinay's colleagues, even though I'm retired now. So thank you for bringing it to us.
So we could only share a few two excerpts, but the entire film is available on YouTube, and if Atticus could kindly share it for the group. Thank
you. Mr. Singh.
Yeah, I'm very happy to see the excerpts of this film and the comments made by the producers. Though directly, the film does not talk about the contemporary scenario that we are in nowadays in India, but I think there is a very subtle kind of layer in the film, though it was made very much earlier than this period, but the kind of secular space where the workers are fighting for their survival, that secular space is no more secular, though the film doesn't say it directly, but as already said earlier by someone, it's a highly political film, but made in a very, very aesthetic and very powerful manner. I really congratulate the people who made it, and they took time to see what the working class is facing there. The fact actually is that this poet and this painter, they also belong to that class, and that class is being marginalized like anything by not only rich people, but by the people who are no more secular. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that comment. In fact, the film does directly comment also on, because this film was made after the communal violence of 1992, which we lived through. And I think that profoundly changed our relationship with the city. So later in the film, Surve particularly does refer to, in fact, it takes a very kind of a hard stand on Hindu nationalism, and he directly calls them out in the film. And Sudhir didn't want to comment, but he comments through his work rather than in words. But the film does also deal with the complete sort of disappearance of that secular space, working class space.
There's a kind of a sizable chunk where that issue is discussed.
Towards the latter part.
Right. In fact, Narayan Surve wrote a poem about the riots in the city, which was a watershed event in the history of the city, and he does speak about it. Unfortunately, we couldn't share the whole film, which is close to 50 minutes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Christine?
Yes, I don't know. Can everyone hear me? I would also like to applaud the two filmmakers who are extremely powerful films. I love the focus on the working class because they often get neglected and ignored, and especially what their everyday life is like. But I was especially struck by the comment of the poet saying that back in the days when his mother abandoned him, people were more generous then. And that remark really struck me because it seems so true. Because today people are not so generous. I mean, I don't know if a child abandoned in a train station or was it the mill or train station? In any case, I don't know that a child abandoned today would be adopted that way. So thank you very much for all that I've learned today about Mumbai, a city I would like to visit someday. Thank you.
He rose to become one of the most significant poets in Marathi literature.
I just want to offer a couple of brief observations. There is obviously, I think, a harmony, between the aspirations and the political will that I think, Anjali, you and Jayasankar bring to your work, and of course, the work of Sudhir, working in a very different medium, and the work of Narayan Surve. One thought I had was that the film makes me think that the labor that, what we think of as labor, the labor of work, physical work, what is its relationship to the labor of poetry? Because poetry requires labor too. And I think that there is a kind of a running dialectic in this film, I would say, between the labor of poetry and the labor of what we ordinarily recognize as work. The second observation here is that I found most poignant, at least in the episodes that you had shown, I mean, the first 15 minutes and then the conclusion, I found, I think, perhaps one of the most poignant stories to be the story where Narayan Surve mentions this anecdote where, he and his friends were swimming, and then the fakir, takes away their clothes. Of course, I was also reminded, incidentally, I mean, there's always a mythic element. The Indian mythos is always there. I was reminded of the story of the gopis, taking a bath in the river, and Krishna comes along and then takes their clothes away. The very famous episode of the Vastra, the theft of the clothes, right? The Vastra Haran. But I mention this because it seems to me that this anecdote is particularly poignant because the poet and the painter that you have identified, that you have worked with, both of them were particularly adept at, in a way, stripping the city naked. That is, showing the grittiness of the city, you see, because to be naked is to render things in their absolute truth, so to speak. Let's remember that Mohandas Gandhi said that his life's ambition was to strip himself naked, actually, right? We think of him, of course, and that has a relationship to truth, you know, to nonviolence and all of that. And I think that, from me, the film resonates in all of these kinds of ways. But I want to sort of end my brief reflections. I had a number of other thoughts, but in the interest of moving along, I just wanted to see if you might be able to elaborate, you know, very, very briefly on what you called the dialectic of the loom. The dialectic of the loom. What is the nature of this dialectic that you're trying to convey when you speak of the dialectic of the loom? The loom, of course, you know, you're spinning yarn, but you're spinning a story too. You're weaving a pattern, right? I mean, that's part of it. But I wonder if you had some further thoughts.
Yeah. We want to speak about, right? You know, the loom. I mean, of course, the dialect. When I meant dialectics, we were kind of looking for a metaphor that's powerful enough to connect these. And the loom represents the city in many ways. So, you know, we thought, when you say dialectics, it makes possible twinning forces make that city, the fabric of the city, possible. And, you know, the quote from Charles Correa, which I kind of mentioned about this wonderful city and the terrible space, is something that, I mean, there is something interesting connection there, which we thought is a loom makes possible for us to kind of appropriate. In fact, you mentioned about these, you know, that's an interesting idea. In fact, we've written about Sudhir's work where Sudhir is actually a radiologist by profession. He's a doctor. So we called it critical social radiology, so to speak. You know, he kind of, a radiologist produces images which are of the real, but at the same time, they are not, you know, a reflection of the real. So, you know, it's kind of, it produces an image that is actually deeply meaningful, yet not mimetic or looking at the city. So, so these are some of the ideas when we were trying to kind of grapple with when we said the dialectics. So.
And even, I mean, if you take the two main protagonists of the film, they're very, very different from each other. One, you know, sees himself as a working class poet, someone who's worked as a child laborer in the mills, you know, in the 30s and 40s. And the other one comes from a middle class, upper middle class background, a doctor. So, and one works with the image, the other one works with the word. And yet these two very different sort of worlds, in a sense, two very different ways of seeing somehow come together to create a third, you know, something that's neither this nor that, but in a sense represents the possibilities of a city like Mumbai.
Thank you. Thank you for that explanation. So before we move on to the next presenter, let me just very quickly add that, you know, in 2013, Oxford University Press published my 2-volume anthology. It's called the Oxford Anthology of the Modern Indian City. It's not on a city, it's a huge work, and basically it's a tapestry of work done on cities. So you'll find, all of you, the poetry of Narayan Surve represented in it as well. And in fact, a portfolio of some of the city paintings of Sudhir Patwardhan, who is of course featured in the film that we just saw. So thank you once again. And now, Jagosh, I'd like to invite you to introduce Paul Lodge.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, meine Damen und Herren, I'm very, very happy that Paul accepted invitation. And Paul is a very, very strange, rare, and great person. So let me say a few words about him. So he's a professor of philosophy at the University of Oxford, where his academic research centers around the philosophy of Leibniz. More recently, he has started to write about the ways in which his engagement with philosophy has helped him navigate the experiences which have led to his long-term bipolar disorder diagnosis. Paul has also been a singer, also or mainly, I don't know, you'll decide. Paul has also been a singer, a songwriter for the past 35 years. And today he will introduce two of his most recent musical projects, which bring his philosophical and musical interests into harmony. And I know Paul for some time, and we met in some way on Oxford University. We made an event with David Fricke from Rolling Stone, with Gideon Coe from BBC and Sylvie Simons, and it was called It Sings, Therefore We Are, Philosophy and Music in Conversation. And I guess we are now thinking about making a second chapter, and it will be, I guess, online project. So if it will happen, of course, please feel invited. And we also are working or thinking with Paul about making another, or together making a musical project. But the point is that we invited Paul because it's really rare, very rare combination, very strange combination, very high quality combination of a really great singer, songwriter, and a really great philosopher, and in the same time. So it's almost impossible, but somehow it's possible. So I'm sorry for this big introduction and monologue. Paul, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Grzegorz. I don't know if I can follow that, but obviously I'm delighted to be here. I want to share a screen with you. And I have a PowerPoint presentation, which I will start if I can get rid of. Just 2 seconds. There's a right, there we go. So I want to talk about, I'm calling this Philosophy and Music in Conversation, and I want to talk about a couple of things that I've been doing. So they both bring together these two passions, philosophy and writing and performing songs. The first one, Cantat Ergo Sumus, which is the Latin, which Grzegorz just translated. It sings, therefore we are. That's where that came from. And that's a project I'll talk about in a second. And then my more recent one is called Preludes to Wordsworth. So let me start with Cantat Ergo Sumus. It sings, therefore we are. Obviously a play many of you will know on Descartes' Cogito Ergo Sum. There's a long version explaining what this project is, which if anybody wants to read it, is accessible as part of a philosophy department magazine that we do every year. So there's a 4-page article in there. But I want to give you a quick version. So the project that eventually became Cantat Ergo Sumus, began in 1994 when I was a graduate student at Rutgers University doing my PhD, and there I am in the middle there. And the thought was to, in some sense, make philosophy accessible in a non-didactic way by using catchy tunes. I never attempt really to explain what's going on in any of the songs when I perform them. That's not the point. As I mentioned in the article, the way that I got interested in philosophy in part was through it being in kind of popular culture. There were things that I watched on TV and then songs that I listened to as well. So this was part of the thought. Back in 1994, I just set 3 poems to music. And then I used to perform a little bit in particular in this bar here in New Brunswick, which is the town that Rutgers University is in. This bar is called Tumulty's Bar, and it's now actually a jazz club. I went back there a few years ago. So I performed a little bit, and then it just sat and did nothing for years and years and years. And then about 5 years ago, I really started playing music a bit more seriously again. And I picked up this project and I managed to find a grant that I could get from an organization within the university called the Oxford Centre for Research in the Humanities. And they gave me a small grant when I came up with this idea of developing the project with a band that I had got to know through other things that I'd been doing. And they're called Flights of Helios. Really interesting local band. They do a kind of psychedelic drone folk music. So we worked together, and there's some pictures of us working together. The project has essentially three elements: live performance. So there's 2 live performances, me playing with the band. The recording of what have ended up being 9 songs. So I've written about another, well, a couple more as well, but there are 6 more that are going to be part of our project. And then wider dissemination. And of course, today is an example of wider dissemination. This was, as you might remember, 2020-21 was the grant year. And of course, that was a terrible year to be doing anything to do with music. So it all got stalled, but we sort of brought it back to life. Those pictures on the previous page were actually pictures of a couple of performances that we now managed to do. The first one was in this tiny little venue called Hogacre. And then the second one was a small theatre in Oxford called the Old Fire Station. So we've had a couple of performances. And then we've actually recorded some songs, and a couple of them are now at the point where they've been mastered. And we have 2 more, which will form initially an EP, and then hopefully within the next 6 months or so, we'll finish off the rest and there will be an album. So those 2 are there on Bandcamp. I don't know if anybody knows Bandcamp, but it's a place where musicians put their work. It can be listened to there, and it can also be downloaded. So there's a couple of songs there. I don't sing on either of those. You'll hear one of them in a minute. But I do sing on some of them. The wider dissemination, so there you've got I've introduced you to the performance, I've introduced you to the recording, and I've started to take the songs out. I did a little thing at a workshop on the 17th century philosopher Margaret Cavendish in 2020. That was online. It was ostensibly at Trinity College Dublin. It was one of the things that had to move online, and I sang a couple of songs. Other people were giving talks about her philosophy, and I just sang a couple of songs because 2 of the songs are poems by Margaret Cavendish. Grzegorz has already mentioned it sings Therefore We Are, Philosophy and Music in Conversation, which we did as a way of sort of introducing, well, one of the songs, but it was largely this conversation with Sylvie Simmons, David Frick and Gideon Coe. And I should say at this point, just to give a nod, all of the graphics are done by my extremely talented wife, Keiko. And so, yeah, everything that you see that's visual is something that she's done. And that was the banner that she came up with there for that particular event. And we have had some airplay. So BBC Music introducing Oxford. So the BBC has this thing called BBC Music introducing, where new artists play their music, and it's done via local radio stations. So we've had a couple of things on Radio Oxford, and we're going to keep trying to have more. So let me mention the songs. There's the 9 of them, and there's the people who were connected with them. The first one is my vague translation of part of the Tao Te Ching. Then there's a setting of an antiphon by Hildegard von Bingen, who is a medieval mystic kind of philosopher. Another one by Marguerite Porete from a similar time period, another woman mystic philosopher. And then we move a little bit forward with Ramon Llull, who's a Catalan philosopher, poet, polymath. Into the 17th century, there are 2 by Margaret Cavendish, who I've already mentioned. Then I have the poem Brahma by Ralph Waldo Emerson, Zarathustra's Roundelay by Nietzsche, and then finally, not exactly something straight from Benjamin, but I took one of his theses from the philosophy of history, if any of you know that, and I used the cut-up technique that David Bowie used to use, where you just kind of throw all the words into a random generator. This was an online one, and then kind of piece them together into some lyrics. So I want to take most of the time to play you some songs. The first one is going to be me singing. This is not from the album. This is still a kind of demo version, and this is my version of Zarathustra's Roundelay, which is from Nietzsche's famous book, Thus Spake Zarathustra. It's actually in the book twice. And the second time is in the last but one chapter, which is called The Drunken Song. And here Zarathustra tells us at least the following about what it means. All things are entangled, ensnared, enamored. If you ever wanted one thing twice, if you ever said, you please me, happiness, abide, moment, then you wanted all back, for all joy wants eternity. So this is Nietzsche's idea of the eternal recurrence of the same. Now, lots of ways of interpreting that, but one of them is the idea that you're supposed to get yourself into a frame of mind where you will commit, you will be able to see how good the moment is, such that you're willing to take everything that ever went with it and live it all through again. So this is my setting of that poem. And hopefully we can get it to sound. There we go.
Oh, mankind attend, oh, mankind attend. What does deep midnight's voice contend? I slept my sleep, I slept my sleep, and now awake at dreaming's end. The world is deep, the world is deep, deeper than the day can comprehend. Deep is its woe, deep is its woe, joy deeper than heart's agony. Woe says fate go, woe says fate go, but all joy wants eternity. Once deep, once deep, once deep eternity. Once deep, once deep, once deep eternity. Once deep, once deep, once deep eternity.
Okay, so that was one of them. That was me singing. And then I want to give you another one, which is part of the collaboration. This is a song which we've called Redness of Blood, and it's an antiphon written by Hildegard von Bingen. I did a translation from the Latin. It's nobody knows quite where it comes from, but it's supposed to be, seems to be an allusion to a mythical massacre of St. Ursula and the 11,000 virgin martyrs This is, yeah, it's a mythical story that's supposed to date back to, I think it's the 4th century. And Hildegard wrote music as well, and there is a marvelous setting of this. It's a single voice. If you don't know Hildegard's music, it's worth checking out. There are various recordings of it. Yeah, the version that we've got is different, very different from what you just heard. And it was produced by the guy who's the bass player for Flights of Helios, and he managed to drag in some friends of his and get some favors. So we have a wonderful woman singing on this called Sarah. Okay, so I'm going to cut that one a little bit short in the interest of time. I wanted to at least get a little bit of the jingle kind of sound of the psychedelia coming in before I stopped. So I want to move from that to talk about this other project, which is more recent, and this is I call Preludes to Wordsworth, a bit of a corny pun, but this one comes from a very different kind of sort of provocation. I was listening to Radio 3, which is the station in the UK which plays classical music one morning, and the Wordsworth family there was somebody had written in, and they'd asked the presenter, and they'd done this to call for contributions to a website called wordsworth250.com. So one of Wordsworth's descendants, a guy called Christopher Wordsworth Andrew, he was assembling readings of Wordsworth's poems because it was the 250th anniversary. The family had been intending to get together, loads of descendants, and do readings themselves at Rydal Mount, which is where Wordsworth lived for most of the later part of his life. But again, the pandemic set in, and so they couldn't. Now you can see on the right-hand side, this is the website for the project. I don't know if you'll recognize any of the faces there, but there's William H. Macy, Brian Cox, the actor. There are various other actors, and then lots of non-famous people as well, of course, including me. I didn't send in a poem. I just kind of decided I would try and set one of the poems to music that day, and I managed to do it. It's the one I'm going to actually play for you. And Christopher posted it, and he was very nice, and I kept going because it was the pandemic and I was at home a lot. And then there are 9 songs altogether. And there they are. I don't know whether any of those poems will be familiar to people, but obviously the most famous one is I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud, otherwise known as Daffodils. Lucy Gray is quite a famous one, We Are Seven. So those all exist. And then by complete happenstance, I got to know a guy called Ryan Michaels, and there he is with his wife, and they're part of a kind of country rock duo. So very, very different from anything that I would listen to, let's say. But Ryan very kindly has helped me produce an album. It's a short album, which has 5 of the songs, and then there are a couple of acoustic versions of 2 of them as well. So Lucy Gray and to blank, blank, blank. That's the dashes because we don't get told who Wordsworth is writing for. On Her First Ascent to Helvellyn, those are in acoustic versions. The other ones are really interesting. Ryan produced it. It's a full band of really professional musicians behind my voice, which is very strange to listen to for me, but it's quite interesting. And wonderfully, I mean, I managed to get to know Christopher Wordsworth Andrews a bit better, and we set up a launch at Rydal Mount, which is what you can see there, which is in the Lake District, and I'm going to go there on Saturday, September the 17th, and all being well, the album will exist in its final form at that point. There'll be CDs if anybody actually wants to listen to CDs anymore, and it'll all go online as well. And I want to finish by playing you, this isn't the version that will be on the CD. This is the demo that I did. And this is the first one that I wrote and sent in, and it's the Helvellyn song. So I want to play that one for you.
Inmates of a mountain dwelling, thou hast clomb aloft and gazed from the watchtowers of Helvellyn, awed, delighted, and amazed. Potent was that spell that bound thee, not unwilling to obey, for blue ether's arms flung around thee, stilled the pantings of dismay. Lo, the dwindled woods and meadows, what a vast abyss is there. Lo, the clouds, the solemn shadows, and the glistenings heavenly fair, and a record of commotion which 1,000 riches yield, rich and gulf and distant ocean, gleaming like a silver shield. Maiden, now take flight, inherits Alps or Andes, they are thine. With the morning's roseate spirit, sweep their length of snowy line, or survey their bright dominions in the gorgeous colors dressed, flung from off the purple pinions. Evening spreads throughout the west. For the power of hills is on thee, as was witnessed through thine eye. Then, when old Helvellyn won thee to confess their majesty.
So that, as you'll be able to tell, is me, and that's me at 7 years old. Helvellyn, as you probably guess now, is a mountain. It's one of the biggest mountains in the UK. And those are all pictures that I admittedly stole from various places and put together as a film. So that was why, in particular, that poem stood out, and that was the first one that I wrote, because this walk when I was 7 years old was very meaningful for me. And that's me done. So I thank you for listening. It's very nice of you to do that. And were you interested in finding out any more about the music and other things? It is all on this website that I put together. So I will stop sharing my screen at this point.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. So we have a few minutes for a discussion. All comments are welcome, of course.
Great.
Derek from Winnipeg, wonderful, excellent. I like the photography, graphics, music. Thank you.
I just wanted to say I'm not objective, because I know this music for a while and I'm in love with this music, but it's I don't know if you all know the artist, the American artist called Bonnie Prince Billy. It reminds me a lot of Bonnie Prince Billy, but it's not like a copy, but it's also very, very rare, very precious stuff. It's very full of mourning and sadness, but in some ways it's got also vital powers. And Paul is also doing very, very crazy things, such as he's writing music to opera to one of the novels of Franz Kafka. So it's a really crazy story. I didn't hear this kind of a crazy idea, never ever. But the point for me, this music is very sad. It's very sad. It's full of sadness, but in some ways also very romantic and uplifting. So I think it's also a very strange combination. And yeah, it appeals to me. Thank you.
Paul, maybe I might ask you a question.
Yeah, of course.
So I think, Paul, you had said that you were inspired to do this years ago
Yep.
by the thought that you would wanted to make philosophy more accessible through through catchy tunes. I
Mhm.
think
Yeah.
that's how you put it, that this goes back to decades ago. Now, I don't know, incidentally, that we necessarily should try to make philosophy accessible, so to speak. But there's an interesting question, because the philosophers, like poets, all really claim that they have their own language. And I'm sure that better than I do that even modern day critical theorists such as Gayatri Spivak, for example, they've been given awards such as the worst writer of English prose, right? But of course, a claim there is that if you were doing mathematics or engineering, you write in your own language, so to speak, right? So I think you get what I'm driving at. I mean, I would like to kind of think a little bit about that, about what it means to make things accessible, because after all, we do work in our own languages. But it also occurred to me, I heard your rendition, which I absolutely adored, of Brahma, the poem by Ralph Waldo Emerson. And of course, I mean, that poem is really based on actually an insight from the Bhagavad Gita. It's a poem. I mean, I wonder whether one can really make it accessible, so to speak, through any way, because one would have to understand the gist of what it means when Emerson says there's neither the slayer nor the slain, for example, right? So
I think
so I'm interested in this whole question of what it means to speak to the other in a language that we think is accessible.
Well, I think that's just not the notion of accessibility that I have in mind. The idea is that it's simply something that might lead someone to begin the journey for themselves. Certainly, as I said, I mean, there's no way in which when I present or sing this stuff that I try to explain, that I try to perform the philosophy professor and the musician. It's simply, oh, you might never have heard of these people. And then suddenly you find yourself liking a tune and you're dragged in and you don't know what it means. And that's my experience. That was my experience when I was younger. Who are these people? These weird names. I want to know more about them because I like the music, not actually because I, at that point, know anything about what's going on. So that's the kind of hope, is that the people who could get a lot out of whatever their own journey is, and of course, most of the people I'm writing about are not contemporary critical theorists. I mean, I've got Benjamin in there as an interesting figure, but some of the language would not be that kind of language. And it would be more about people having, reading the classics, if you like, for themselves, being invited to engage with these, perhaps by doing academic work, but more likely not.
Yes.
Just so that kind of accessibility is what I have in mind. Whether it be a 13-year-old or a 50-year-old, I mean, maybe no 13-year-old's going to listen to my music these days, but still, that was the thought.
Yeah. Well, I think there you've certainly succeeded eminently, because it resonates in various kinds of ways. And I think, as you put it well, that the idea is it may start someone off on a journey, which is far more than we can expect. Henry.
Yeah, I would add, Professor Lodge, very, very interesting approach. And I think there's another piece of this, and the Nietzsche connection is really interesting, because Nietzsche talked a lot about how shallow, even in his age, people would become as readers, and the idea of really engaging deeply with the work versus the kind of modern approach of just consuming, the information of the work, if I can say it that way. And one thing that really strikes me is that recordings are things that people listen to again and again and again and come back to again and again and again. And that seems in the spirit of what, accessibility through work, I almost want to say, or through continued engagement over time. And I think that's really interesting about this approach, because it translates philosophy from the sort of text that I think in our age, students, I mean, they read once, maybe, and
Yep.
then feel like if they haven't gotten it, there's nothing to get, or it's too hard, something like that. So I think this is a really fascinating approach. Thank you for
Yeah.
opening this.
No,
Yeah.
thanks, Henry. I mean, that's certain. I mean, I do have other thoughts about the way in which the music and the words do interrelate. There's a kind of thinking of them as hymn-like is part of what I'm thinking, that these really are supposed to be easy. You know, the tunes are not supposed to be complicated, precisely, deliberately. We have a setting of Nietzsche by Mahler, you know, but how accessible is that? I mean, I'd love it, but, you know, this is a different kind of thing. And yes, I mean, there's lots more I could say, but it really is about reaching people and getting them to just have it in their head. They can't get rid of it is the idea. Yeah.
Thank you, Paul. You know, in the I would like to make sure that we give the last presenter adequate time as well, and that we have a little bit time left for discussion. So with that, let me move to the last presenter. It's a real pleasure to introduce Kim Shuck, who is a citizen of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma. It has been said of Cherokees, probably by the late Jack Kilpatrick, that their obsession with numbers should have long ago attracted the attention of competent psychiatric attention. This is what she indicated to me. Shuck is just such a Cherokee. Basketry, glass beadwork, origami, crossword puzzles, poetry. Most of her passions are mathematical. Shuck is also solo author of 9 volumes, most poetry, some prose. Her latest are Exile Heart from That Painted Horse Press and Noodle Rant Tangent, a collection of essays from Andover Street Archives. She was San Francisco's 7th Poet Laureate. Welcome, Kim, and over to you.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. I have a lot of thoughts about perception and accessibility, but rather than demonstrating how boring I could be about things like that, I'd rather just read first. Rattle the windows, shake, pelt, storm. Something twists my hair in the night. These aren't knots, but another thing. Writing in a language I can't read, a message for your fingertips. This headache also has needs here in the city, grayed by my age, and is plotting rain and every new green thing in the garden, every whimsical, yearned for thing under a slick April damp. Arts of patience. We've been collecting stairs for years. Stairs in the notion of stairs. Build with them like children do, just like playing with blocks. We'll paint them with hard ideas, with generational hope, may yet reach somewhere else that we had in mind. We wanted so little in those days between bingo and collecting. It doesn't quite fit. The hedge apples grow thorn and poison in the way that they have. We collect them. Comb rivers and creeks, the margins of change for things like glass bottles to exchange for bait. Catch other things we want to. And all of my heroes were good at filleting fish. There we were in the living room, gathering stairs and boxes, pressed flat in books, trying not to hide them, trying not to feel guilty. Frog. When the first four-legged frog cousin pulled herself out of water, it wasn't rejection. Soft, wet skin called her back again and again. Blood, a contract with water, a promise in the cells, a rattle we pick up and hand on, a moaning song that arches and clenches to bring our babies cradled in water, a gift returned, a rattle we pick up and hand over, one generation to the next. Belief. Today is a fighter with edges and cat ear tatters that poets read about the safety of streets when they were young and the numbers don't agree. But this poet believes it, so he poems about it. He's safer than ever now, but he remembers fondly the 1800s when he might have sold my head to the state. Some of us learn to curl up tight to build safety out of invisibility, and some of us can't breathe. I'm looking for an old story, a story that's walked a few hillsides ravaged by wildfires, a story that's been evacuated ahead of the flood, carrying only a backpack full of photos and grandpa's gold watch. I need a story that likes secondhand stores. The sort where you can get a jar of mother of buttons or camel hair overcoat. A story collects scraps of waste and interesting hand tools. I want a story. I think I want something hopeful. We who steal ourselves back from songs and laws and habits that claim us and everything about us. The long men, the wide-hipped and generous bays, protective as any mother. We who can still hear Lovejoy's breath, can hear it from under the water, the supervisory singing wolves. We who sing to other songs. We steal ourselves back, the kidnapped, hostage, the unransomed, the unransomable. We learn songs to pick locks, to absorb your laws and habits. We are coming for ourselves. We are on our way. In the walnut grove. That year, the wind took the topsoil and the children. The maps all changed and not everyone found a pair of magical shoes or good company. I wonder if she paused every time she introduced herself, if it was a question between her teeth. The taproots go somewhere unknown, and we understand that every family has stories that are painted over. There are always things hidden in the walls. But when all you know is the blank wall and hints and suggestions of what might be in there, and you know that all of the expected family portraits are painted in ink only visible under a certain moon. So those were all from Exile Heart. Which is kind of a companion book, another of my books called Deer Trails. And we split Oklahoma and Cherokee focused, and the Deer Trails poems are San Francisco focused. And these are sort of rogue poems. They're from all kinds of different times. Story follows story as it has since the various beginnings. Old responsibilities run clear, trouble the wind over things some thought had slipped away. But those things were curled and healing in places where the world changes, where the story pulls deep, story filtered through sand and hillside, pine and cedar. The dreaming wishes of original beings, even those that have gone. And I'm trying to avoid the word sacred, so I'm going to say connected. We are reminded that community is more than close cousins, connected. Maybe enough to say the things that we believe but hold close, away from the not too distant histories, away from the ways we can't protect each other right now. Hold them close and safe. We are the living dreams of those who have come before. Old responsibilities, running clear with the new ones. We living dreams, connected. Not less than our ancestors, than the stories tended, sometimes whispered in illegal languages. Stories that teach us not all of the endings can be tragic, no matter what the prevailing theory says, no matter that the story came through a frightened school child, gone and still waiting to be found. A stolen woman whose part of the story sings from the edges, a combat vet who may still be rebuilding their story. It's a brave thing that we're all here now. connected. A moment to recognize what it is to be part of the solution. Stubborn, beautiful. And yes, that was always part of the story, but no less breaking, no less a positive choice. A handful of purposes connected. With all old responsibilities, reminders that we are here to take care of each other, we mechanisms of water and plant, hillside and human. We're here to take care. And on this coast, they found small yellow flowers declared extinct, but there, under the trees, it's not the gold people came to hunt here, but it is the gold that they've found, harvested by rare bees, connected. These stories, and I may be among the least who tend them, and even if we are working in different places in the same direction, connected, we can decide that old responsibilities we carry into more brave story. Can you read The Shattered Glass? Field strip a poem, hand smelling of poem oil and cordite. Cough raven down, graven down. Emergency cloud formations bookmark between handwritten spells. Can you read The Shattered Glass? A soothsayer's meditation in these parts, in these days. You might be randomly stopped and searched, poems and heart and surgical eye swabbed for poem residue, and they'll find it there, as clear as any other fortune floating in blue liquid. Can you read The Shattered Glass? The shattered social contract, souvenir skin kept for best, because the parasite is canny, because we're canny. Shoulders pressed against the piers of the overpass, letting the poem vibrations pass through our flesh. Hunting in the downtown. You know how those deer are on Market Street with their stoplight eyes, picking their way down old runoff paths past disappearing relocated Indigenous women. The ravens are here to sing us visible, drumming on their collection of upended pots and industrial buckets. Don't you tell me how we've changed. We were right there, near the department store, near the burial site, singing to the ancestors. This isn't an abstract gesture. It's not a schoolroom exercise. There are predators here. And the maps of safe passage change from day to day. And the wind comes up in the afternoon. Don't you tell me how we've changed. The roots of this hill have learned what to call us just about. Our clothes collected for the festival, our family members taken to who knows. You might just sit down and listen for a change. I'm not part of your curriculum. We're a whole other thing. Light reflecting off miles of glass. How many feet deep was it? Can you hear the water like shattered windows, piled just like them, just there where the tall buildings lean like ceiling? Calculate the equation for consent on the freeway retaining walls, tattoo it on their skin. We've made our bodies from the ideas of heroes, and now we have to live in them. Write poems to the idea of them, the idea of them. What time did I spend laboring my children from idea, from body, from ideology into a new story cycle of error and judgment? Yes, I stand as self, unstable and political in all the useless ways, choosing which anger to feed in these long waning days, in this time of ceremony, in this moment of betrayal. Yes, there are things that I would risk to spit, narrow definitions of woman rewritten and baleful, a dangerous spell into the teeth of abusers and enablers, because in that room, on that side of the debate, you were one or the other. And we find a way to heal, and we will, my beloveds, yes, we will. Aspiring jailers and torturers, yes, we will. And then I hunted this up after the clips from the movie that got shared. We might talk about this more. My master's degree is actually in studio textiles, so I weave a lot. River Road, you are the loom that I've been woven on so far. We baked rosemary bread today, and I warn you, I'm going to make you cry. I'm going to make you sleep. There are pieces of you scattered from here to there, and even the small things have been able to collect every thread and crack woven together, and the fabric will drape just like you remember it from your blanket forts and your star charts and the uniform you used to wear. You found the brass from those years. You found it, sewn with guitar strings from Roy Clark and Jimmy Page and knotted with faith. I'm going to make you cry. Those round, buffy words. Teach you to rattle in time with dawn songs you'd never thought of that set berries and teach you enough quiet to listen to Gar stories. The Gars will advise me. And I tell you now, you are not leaving this house until you sleep. This one's also from Exile Heart. And I have it on good authority that good poets edit, which I don't. And also that good poets don't have favorite poems, which I do. And this is one of my favorite poems. WPA Bridge over the Neosho. I stood on it in full flood with my dad, the water just kissing the underside of the boards, the river moans shivering up my legs until it stood. A flood licked out the footings. They replaced it, but when I dreamed the Neosho, the old bridge is there. They took the zinc out until they hit the daylight of 3rd Street. You could see the crack in the pavement. It looked like any other pothole, and there was sunlight in the mine. Sunlight just there, with the dull ache of lead and the grim scowl of Jack. Those cottonmouths know some songs too. They know some fish songs. And once crossing Tar Creek Bridge, a grandma snake got hit by a pickup, and in her last breaths, we drove up on her there like a burning library, her songs falling away in curls, taken by updrafts like smoke prayers near the water. She looked me in the heart and whispered, just the one secret. What I thought we could do would be to retake that conversation about perception and accessibility at this point. I'm going to say a couple things, and I think that different forms of art are frequently an invitation to your own head, not a window into somebody else's. And I think that because I grew up in a house where half of the family spoke Polish, an archaic form of Polish, so I'm not going to say anything, even though I know there's somebody here who might understand it, and Cherokee. And a lot of the materials that I consumed as a child were written for people in a category I don't belong to at all, but I always got stuff out of it anyway. So that's not about being excluded. That's about finding what you find in the things that are presented to you. And then for a period of time, I wrote curriculum for the Exploratorium. Some of you may have heard of it. I wrote math curriculum for the Exploratorium for a while. And we used to get into these intense conversations. And one of the guys who worked there worked in light. And we used to consistently get into a conversation over whether the blue that I see is the blue that you see. Does it matter? The answer is probably no, but does it matter? If we agree that these vibrations from here to here equal this thing we're going to call that, and it hits us all differently, I'm not sure that's useful. I think the conversation is, and I think art presents questions more than it does answers, even in my most didactic poems, which I read a couple of, but even in those, I don't think I'm suggesting that anyone see things the way I see them. And I'm not necessarily explaining to you what I'm seeing. I'm just trying to, start a spark. So if we could talk about some of that, that would be awesome.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you very much. So we have a little bit time for discussion.
When I was a teacher, I used to think when I'd ask a question or we'd start a discussion, if nobody says anything, you've either covered it entirely or you failed. So if people could say anything at all right now, it would make me feel better.
Or shy, some of us are shy. Thank you so This is Derek from Winnipeg in Ojibwe country, in the Manitoba, Winnipeg, Manitoba, where we have the most indigenous population of all provinces of Canada.
Mhm.
I just want to compliment you for your poetry and in Manitoba, we do have a resurgence of indigenous music, poetry, arts, and literature. So thank you for contributing and being Poet Laureate of San Francisco. It's correct. Also, one compliment for all of us, poetry, as Dr. Lal mentioned earlier, it was featured in the New York Times, but in the Scientific America. I was in CBC Radio, National Radio here in Canada, featured poet Donna Kane. Donna Kane, please look that up. You heard about it, I can see you nodding. Her poem was featured in Scientific America for the first time, a poet from the rural Canada, BC. And the phrase I recall used in that featured complementing the poem is that the science of poetry is similar to the science of science because both explore the mysteries of the universe. Thank you for contributing.
Thank you.
I'm gonna say
Rob-
something actually about,
Go ahead, Kim.
I'm gonna say something actually about a resurgence of First People's work, which is that what that really means is that First People's work is becoming more accessible to people outside of our communities. And that's a very different thing. And I just want to make that point, not to be irritable, but just to make sure you know, we've always done our work. It's just whether or not everybody else gets access to it. That's the issue. Sorry.
Thank you.
Robin?
I just wanted to say that I'll go to bed and metabolize what you were saying about the blue and I'm a painter. So it's a powerful resonant question for me because I would like to know if we see blue differently, but also does it matter? I mean, it's how anything hits us. And that's not really even measurable. Yeah, it's a great thing to ponder for me as a painter. Thank you.
Hillary?
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I have been thinking the same things that that Robin was just mentioning, although I'm not a painter, but as an anthropologist, I know there has been research on this issue of whether people everywhere in the world see certain colors all the same, and blue is one of those that oftentimes is brought up in debate on that. And there have been various experiments, but then I think sometimes that misses the essential question of not only whether it matters, but why it would matter and whether that's really the point. And I think that also goes to the point that Paul was raising about his notion of accessibility, which I liked a lot. And I particularly liked his performance because I know in some of the cultures I'm familiar with, poetry is normally sung. And that's a very important part. And those poems are also oftentimes major vehicles of presenting a philosophy as well. So thank you very much. I've really enjoyed this entire session. It's been wonderful.
Henry?
Sorry, having a little trouble with my mic. I have something much less profound to say only that if there's silence, and I think a lot of us were silent, that's because of the power of the poetry. And I need to reread, think about a lot of what you've done, because some of the ideas I think are just, or the images are really powerful and did strike hard, but I think I need to do some work to this is not easy, simple. We were talking about accessibility with Paul, with philosophy and Paul's work and so forth, and this is the same kind of thing, that it's accessibility through some work, and that's even across sort of cultural divides and assumptions and so forth. So anyway, I just didn't want you to think that silence meant anything like failure, quite the opposite.
That was kind of a joke, but yeah, thank you so much. If you find that you find something you want to talk about, I am appallingly easy to find and communicate with.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you.
Yeah, Matthew?
I'm good. I'll pass. Thank you.
Oh, all right. All right. Any further reflections or comments from anyone else?
Actually, in that case, if no one else is going to say, can I ask, like, if this is like a regular thing, or if there's regular meetings like this? This is the first time.
Sure, sure.
Oh, okay. Where would I find future ones?
Where would you find what, sorry?
Future ones.
Future ones.
Yeah.
Future ones of this enterprise, you mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Just Zoom meetings like this.
Well, you can just put your email in the chat if you like, and I'll make sure that that you get informed about future editions of this, and the recordings of this will of all the sessions are made available on my YouTube channel.
Okay.
There's a special dedicated playlist for this, and that will be in the chat box right now. So you can just go to the chat box and you'll see the information there. Yeah.
Splendid. Thank you.
All right. Okay.
And can I just, I know it will be not very related to the poetry, but on the other hand, you were, because you've got some Polish connections, right? So can you just say something about, are there any chances that Polish culture influenced your poetry and your personality, or is it rather not related, or maybe you don't want to say about that, or maybe, there is another answer?
I am less culturally competent about my mother's side of the family than I am about my father's, but I am as close to half Polish as you can be in the United States, really. Both of my grandparents, well, both grandparents are from a place called Galicia, because I think I've frozen. No, there we go. Both of my grandparents are from, on my mother's side, are from a place called Galicia.
Are all of you able to hear her? Or have I lost the connection?
Did I? Am I back?
I think you're back.
Okay. I was saying that my mother's mother is from a place called Vov, and my mother's father's from a place called Przemyśl. We used to have a really hard time telling people where those were, but we've been seeing those two places on the news a whole lot lately. And they were both from a place called Galicia, which is now Poland and parts of Ukraine.
And Lvov is Ukraine, right now. Yeah. Very fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that they do. There was a point in my life where there were words I wasn't sure if they were in English, Polish, or Cherokee. So there has to be a connection.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think that there is. And if I would say something in Polish, if I hadn't found out that my Polish is incredibly archaic, both of my grandparents having learned it about the last century. But thank you for your interest. It's
my pleasure.
Make my mother
thank you for your poetry.
Thank you. Kim, I just have, it's not really a question, it's just a comment, which arises from your reading and from the poems that I've read. I know that First People nations are not all alike by any stretch of the imagination. But what has sometimes been said of all of them, of all the First Peoples in North America, is that all of them had a very different relationship to the land than white Europeans did. Land is not something that you simply sell, or, to use another vocabulary, that you alienate, as it has been. It's not a market commodity, never has been. The question or comment that really comes to mind here is that I would go so far as to say that in the writings of many of American Indian poets I've seen, the land, so to speak, writes its own poetry. Okay, there's this wonderful book by Bruce Chatwin called Songlines.
Yes.
I'm sure you're familiar with it. It's one of the classics of literature coming out of an experience of Australia, because one of the things he was trying to convey was that that the Aboriginal populations saw things on the land which white Europeans simply didn't. And that's why, of course, they used Aboriginals as trackers. There's this beautiful film on the tracker, which is a fantastic psychological exploration of this whole issue. But one of the things he was really saying in that book was that the land tells its own stories. It weaves its stories from the imagination of the Aboriginals, you see, and the white Europeans who went there, they couldn't see a thing there, frankly, right? So what's your relationship as a member of the Cherokee Nation to the land, and how do you think about this question? I'm interested.
I'm going through a moment right now where I'm realizing that some of the things I assumed people understood out of what I say and what I write are absolutely unclear. So my relationship with the land, well, for example, my partner is not Native and is also not Polish. And will often ask me why I see the birds and comment on them. And because they're there is really the answer to that question. And I guess the reason that I'm having a problem answering that question is because I didn't realize it was a question until pretty recently, and I'd have a more practiced answer to it if I did. We've been talking lately in local indigenous communities about land acknowledgements and getting deeper than a land acknowledgement. Like, why is it important to know, for example, that I live on Ramaytush territory? And it's important to know because if you want to understand the place I live and the spirit of it, you need to listen to Ramaytush stories in order to do that, because the colonial, I am not going to try to explain to a room full of so many people who clearly also are from cultures that have been colonized and by many of the same people as colonized my people. But when somebody arrives with a colonial intent, they want to take things out of the system, right? They built a great railroad system because there are some things you can't slip in your backpack and steal. And so, the actions all sort of come from a place and they have an agenda. If your intent is to live on a place and continue to live there, you pay attention to things like, wow, once every 7 years we get some good rain, and then every once in a while we get none, and then the hills catch on fire. You start paying attention to systems. And also that humans, our noses aren't as good as a lot of other mammals, our eyes aren't as good as a lot of other mammals, we lack claws, we lack, there are a lot of things that other creatures do better than us. And so you can learn by watching other things as opposed to a Euro-American perspective, which is, which I used to bounce up against all the time doing sciencey and mathy things, which is we will interrogate the individual pieces until they scream out what they know about things. It's a different perspective entirely. And yeah, so that.
Thank you, Kim.
I don't know if that helps.
No, that's good. Thank you. So before we close, I just want to invite Anjali, Jayasankar, Paul, Jagorsh. Would you have anything to add at all before we close? I have to say that we're 2 hours now from the time that we started. So I have to thank all of you for your perseverance. 2 hours on Zoom is a bit of an achievement to keep that many people there. But if you'd like to add anything,
I just wanted to say that I'm very, very happy and very, very thankful, and I'm saying good night from Poland, near city of Gdańsk. It's super hot right now, and the night came. Yeah, and by the way, please feel invited to Poland, to Gdańsk, and I can show you great landscapes, for example, and great people too. It's not so scary. Sometimes it's scary, but not with me. So thank you for being here, and thank you for cooperating, and thank you for your thoughts. I think this session was really special. Thank you.
Anjali and Jayasankar, I know it's past midnight in India.
Yes, it's 12:30.
Yeah, it's 12:30. That's right. Yeah.
No, I thought it was a fascinating session, and it was really interesting how different media kind of spoke to each other, maybe in different ways to different people. But I think that was something that we really enjoyed about this session.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you. So let me just say once again, I want to thank Kim, Paul, Anjali, Jayasankar for presenting. Much appreciated. And thanks to all of you for your perseverance. As I've said in the previous 2 editions, this enterprise is still an experiment. I've been asked by a few people what's going to come out of it. Well, nothing comes out of it necessarily. There's no end product. There shouldn't necessarily be one. And as I've also said, this is one enterprise which is singularly free of the whole question of funding. There's no institutional support. We're not seeking any. We don't want any, frankly. And I hope that this particular enterprise will, continue. I just would, all I ask from anyone is their time and attention. And I hope that you can pass the word around. So with that, once again, thank you to everyone. And, you should be getting word relatively soon, I hope, about the 4th edition of Sangam and Agora. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
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 Bye.
Bye.